Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 4th of March 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Mike Robinson buried deep behind the technical desk, but also, of course, in the studio. And we're going to be joined by live Skype link by David Scott with Northern Exposure. Talking of exposure, we should say that the temperature has dropped here in Plymouth. I think we were up at about 2 degrees this morning, which is pretty cold for those that live in the south of England. And the blue sky gave way to heavy rain and then a bit of sleet. Meanwhile, we understand that north of the border, although it's been cold, blue sky with hints of sunshine apparently. A bit changeable in Pembrokeshire, and Norfolk, I think, wins the prize because it's bright. So there we are, weather changeable, a bit like our politics. Before I really introduce David Scott, who's going to do a really in-depth look at what's happening from a north of the border perspective, let's just have a look at what has started to come to the surface in relation to the sheer treason of Britain's politicians. And what better person to start with than George Osborne? What's the story? The story is that it's been revealed that buildings across Westminster are now governed by Sharia law. And how has this come about? It's come about because the government decided to raise some 200 million in a bond arrangement with Islamic banks. They thought this would be a good idea to help start London as the centre of global banking system wherever you are and whatever form it takes. As a result of the leases going into the hands of Islamic interests, they've said, well, under our rules on the leaseholds, we're going to implement Sharia law. Now, this has really started to hit the surface because the buildings are clustered around Westminster. So this is the Daily Mail's article. We've got some comment on it. Douglas Carswell, UKIP, said, amongst other things, that the government withheld the truth about the buildings and the circumstances. We say that really means that David Cameron and his team lied. UKIP parliamentary spokesman Suzanne Evans, the Prime Minister made no mention of the fact funding would actually be raised by handing over the leases of publicly owned government buildings. We think that basically means lied. And of course, we've got David Cameron hiding here in the background. But this story is really starting to move because, of course, it's the principle that the public simply did not know the circumstances where public assets are simply being handed away to foreign interests. Well, it's not just George Osborne on his own, of course, because in the same article was this picture, which we couldn't resist. We've got Boris here and Osborne swigging beer. We've put the caption in, Boris and Osborne celebrate the end of Parliament. We'll explain that. But we get a picture of these two jolly chaps. Whose interests are they working for? Well, we would suspect George Osborne totally controlled by the corrupt international banking cartel, and Boris Johnson probably the same. David, probably a good time to bring you in here because I think you recognise Boris Johnson from a television programme, is it?
Yes, my granddaughter, who's 3, is a big fan of The Little Kingdom, which is all about a fairy and an elf and the life they have living at the bottom of your garden in a tiny little village. And the mayor of the village is clearly modelled on Boris Johnson, complete with hair.
Complete with the hair. The danger of that little story is, of course, there's enough people think he's a buffoon. We think he's a buffoon, but a very dangerous one. The other key point to this Daily Mail article is that apparently the structural condition of Westminster is confirmed to be so bad that Parliament is going to have to move out for probably 6 years as they carry out billions of pounds worth of repair work. It does seem a remarkable coincidence that as the vice-like jaws of the EU clamp themselves around the UK, we've got to move our politicians out of the seat of government and move them to another location. I believe Manchester has been named for that. But here we start to see the dismantlement of UK. And we'd just like to give ourselves some praise, really, because here's the May 2000 UK column. One of the major articles was Countdown to the Abolition of Britain. And the other supporting article, which I think is very pertinent, Labour and Conservatives push pornography for children. And that, of course, is what we were talking about this week. I'm just going to bring this on screen expanded because this is a timeline to the abolition of Britain. It was put together by David Noakes. Looking back now, I think he was extremely accurate in what he was seeing. And so I'll leave it up to our viewers to freeze this page and they can have a look at it at their convenience. But the two things go hand in hand because, of course, the abuse of children has been used as the blackmail mechanism by which the European Union can be brought in as a foreign power. Well, just to give it a north of the border flavour, in April 2008, we had this headline, General Public Demand Police Action on Treason in Westminster. And David, I'm delighted to say that we had a retired army captain here who'd gone into Kirkcaldy police station in Scotland in order to report treason. And I can tell you that the response he got was much the same as we received south of the border, a sense of disbelief by many of the police, and then many of them trying to tell us that the treason laws had all disappeared. Over to you on that one. Any progress on treason in Kirkcaldy?
Well, I'm just glad he managed to walk away without any severe bruising and or being sectioned, because that's the other thing. If you challenge the wise overlords too much, you must be unhinged, and therefore you get a visit from people who describe themselves as services and there to help you.
Indeed, the so-called MAPA community support team. Well, you've mentioned accusations of conspiracy. So this is probably the headline that beats all of them. David Cameron said during his meeting in France that France's Brexit warning is not a, quote, David Icke-style conspiracy to keep Britain in the EU. So we've put a caption in here, methinks David Cameron doth protest too much. He had something on his mind. Why did he have David Icke on his mind when he was at a political meeting? We wonder whether possibly the accusations that the EU is a subversive conspiracy is too close to the truth for comfort. Alternatively, could it be David Icke's focus on child abuse in Westminster is dwelling on Cameron's mind? Or as somebody told Cameron that conspiracy is actually a criminal offence and that handing power to a foreign power, the EU, is treason. This is a very interesting one, David. The more I think about this, the more fascinating it is that what's going on. Could it be that the alternative media is beginning to take its toll on our politicians?
Yes, I think that's certainly the case. And also, when we come to the EU, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's well documented that this was an arrangement whereby the governance of the entire European continent would be changed very gradually so that people wouldn't notice, and the end target for this would be kept secret from the people. They simply wouldn't be told. Is that not the very definition of a conspiracy?
Indeed it is, and in the coming days we're going to be reporting on the excellent work by a gentleman called Dave Barmby, who dug out all of the original documents showing that back in Ted Heath's days there was a conspiracy, a provable conspiracy, to deceive the public and lure them into voting yes to go into the European Economic Community. Well, just focusing for the moment on the present day, or recent times, I should say, have a look at this, because this is a parliamentary research document. It's dated the 20th of November 2008, and here's the title, Eurosceptic Campaigns Alleging the Abolition of Westminster. And we just put in a bit of a highlight there. Westminster will be abolished. Well, clearly that's what we are now seeing. Of course, the moment the politicians are out of Westminster, our Parliament ceases to exist. And this was comment within this research, which was heavily focusing on David Noakes, because David Noakes was the person who said that the European Union had the constitution of a dictatorship and the laws of a police state. We also noticed that somebody had asked this parliamentary research team to investigate those naughty people who were beginning to dig into the organisation Common Purpose. So probably David Cameron isn't sleeping too well, because he's finally worked out that the public can see through his treason, and the European Union does indeed have the constitution of a dictatorship and the laws of a police state. And of course, David, over to you, David Scott. We know, of course, what happens when we get a police state. As you've already indicated, people start to die in custody.
Yes, we're still waiting for any proper statement or proper investigation or proper justice for the Sheikh Obeil case, and so many more all across the United Kingdom. And of course, we have the person in charge of that investigation is none other than Dame Elise Angelini, an individual we have the most serious reservations concerning after her conduct of the Holly Gregg case.
Indeed. Okay, well, it's really over to you. I've got the first slide here ready to go, which is educating our viewers and listeners as to another word from the Scottish vocabulary.
Yes, this is the word. The word for the week in Scots today is thrawn. Now, thrawn means both stubborn and possessing a resolute conviction or determination that you are right, even if you're the only one. And it used to be a very common Scottish trait. You may have noticed this, and I thought it was dying out. We live in a world where we're all being told to be collective, and the new Scotland is being modelled, it would seem, on the Borg cube ship. So I've got a couple of articles here that show that thrawn is still alive and well and thriving in Scotland, and I'm very glad to see it surfacing here and there in the press.
Indeed, so am I. So take us through. The first one we've got here is a protest, which looks a little bit like the Westminster type protest.
Yes, we have two tented villages. We have a tented village protesting for Scottish independence on the lawn outside Holyrood Parliament, and the Parliament is now deciding whether or not to be seen to evict them, no doubt with violence and police and truncheons and things. So they're realising that might not be the best press in the world for the nationalist government. So they're unsure how to proceed with this. But there's another protest group now based in Glasgow, and the two protest groups have declared independence from one another. So I thought that was a lovely moment in the thrawn tradition of Scotland.
Okay, so we move from thrawn to chicken dance.
Yes, and here we have, this is a little indication into the nature of local politics, and specifically Lanarkshire local politics, because here we have someone who's been acquitted. He was being looked at by a watchdog for his behaviour in a North Lanarkshire council office in the middle of a heated debate. I think this gentleman's a nationalist. In a heated debate with the Labour Party, he did the chicken dance to a Labour Party councillor to taunt him for being presumably cowardly and not being up for the fight. And this was viewed as robust behaviour, but perfectly acceptable and not something that he should be censured for. So there we go. That's how to conduct yourself if you ever find yourself in a North Lanarkshire council chamber.
Okay, well, the way vulnerable people are treated is a key part of what life in a dictatorship or a police state is about. And your article here indicating that people north of the border are beginning to get tired, is that the word, of callous indifference by public services?
Well, callous indifference is absolutely correct, and this is probably the most important article, I think, from Scotland this week. It's by Maggie Mellon, who has a background in social work and in the charitable sector, and is actually part of the No to Name Person campaign. But she's extremely knowledgeable in all things governmental and social services, having been in this sector for many years at a very high level. She was she got to know a homeless man who was living in the street near her home. She talked to him on many occasions, and as he was clearly deteriorating, and was talking about being perhaps suicidal, he'd been in the street so long, she tried to personally help him get through the bureaucracy of the state, all of the departments who are allegedly there to help him. And she found it, she described it as Kafkaesque. She got nowhere. Anytime she questioned the generally rude and unhelpful people she was interacting with, that questioning was viewed as being unacceptable abuse, and phone calls were terminated and the line would go dead. She couldn't get through to anybody who could help this man. And his situation was there was a house available. If he could actually get through the form filling exercise for a housing grant, he could be off the streets. The problem could be solved. And for want of a signature and someone helping in a practical and useful way, the problem was not solved. And it was a terrible indictment of the system, which, despite taking huge amounts of public money to allegedly help the poor, clearly takes the maximum possible amount of money and provides the minimum possible amount of help.
And the money aspect, David, is particularly interesting. We've been pointing a finger at Plymouth City Council this week over the fact they've raised council tax, but we're saying you've got tens of millions of pounds in reserve. You've got the same situation north of the border. I think you've got some information here on concerns and some of the figures.
Yes, I've been seeing reports, particularly from America, about local authorities actually having very large reserves. So I was looking into some of the figures for Scottish authorities. Now, this article here shows that, on average, 44% of the council tax that's raised simply goes to pay debt interest. And it varies. In fact, in the Western Isles, it's over 100%, over 103% of the council tax raised actually goes to pay interest on loans. And I would point out that we are in a zero interest rate environment. So that figure could go stratospheric very easily if the economy moves in a direction of simply normalizing interest rates to something like 5% rather, as opposed to something like 0.25%.
And you've got some specific figures here for Stornoway, would you?
Well, the figures for the Stornoway Council for the Western Isles is 103%. That's more than all of the council tax they raise simply goes in interest payments on existing debt. And I was also looking at my own council, Perthing Ross Council, to see what reserves they had. And on first glance, it looks very impressive. They've got £373 million in reserves. That seems quite a lot, a third of a billion. But in fact, what that turns out to be is the housing stock, principally building stock. And in fact, it's taken a huge leap as it's been revalued upwards by a very substantial margin of almost £250 million compared to the previous year. When you look at reserves that are actually realisable as liquid cash in short order, those are very small. They have something like 2 to 4% reserve, very, very small. So essentially these councils are living year to year on government grant and are actually in a situation where if that government grant is reduced, they have to slash what they provide. There's really no reserve that can be quickly turned into available cash to provide services such as education. The reserves such as they are, at least in Scotland, are all in bricks and mortar.
David, the same situations largely south of the border with some very dubious investments. If we can just bring that slide back on screen.
Yes, the Western Isles, incidentally, the Western Isles notoriously had a lot of money on deposit in a bank at one point because they were getting slightly higher interest rates. That bank was called BCCI, you may remember it.
Indeed, yeah. What I just wanted to do, because the print's very small for this, so good presentation says that we must explain what's there. We've obviously got local authorities listed on the left of the screen. Then we've got council tax income.
Yes, council tax income is the locally raised taxation. So that's about 18-20% of the total council spend, the majority of which comes directly from central government by way of a grant.
Right. Then we've got cost of servicing the council debt. So, for example, Falkirk, which is highlighted just as an example, has got 53 million coming in, but it's spending, I beg your pardon, yeah, it's spending 23 million servicing debt, and then the final column gives that as a percentage. So 44% of the income goes on servicing debt.
Yes.
Any other company that would be bankrupt.
Yes, I mean, as someone who works in the private sector, I look at these accounts, and if I was responsible for that, and bear in mind, in the private sector, you can't force people to pay you via taxation. You have to actually persuade them. But if I was responsible for that, I would be a very, very worried man.
Okay, and you've gone into more detail here with Perth and Kinross Council.
Yes, this is the one. This is my local council, and as I said, they have £373 million of reserves, but that is in fact based on the housing stock and other building stock primarily, and the liquid part of the reserves, cash equivalents, things like government bonds that are tradable, that you could turn into cash in an emergency, are actually very, very small.
Right, and we just say, I'm not sure whether the same system applies north of the border, but south of the border, at a particular date each year, the public are lawfully entitled to go into their local councils to inspect the accounts. And I think we'd like to encourage as many people as possible to take up that very kind offer of the council, because, of course, armed with information about what to actually look for, these massive reserves, and also the amount of money being spent servicing debt, you should be able to ask some pretty powerful questions. You might also be able to personally pin down the Section 151 officers, who are the people responsible for the overall accuracy of the council's bookkeeping. So that might be a very positive thing for you to do, particularly if you're suffering from a hiking council tax.
If anyone in the Perth and Kinross area can explain to me why the value of the government housing stock here suddenly went up by £250 million in 1 year, I'd be very interested to find that out.
Okay. Well, we've got Mr. Kasparov here. This is a fascinating piece of text. Take it through, and I think that's going to lead us to Mr. Trump.
Yes, this is answering the supporters of the competitor of Hillary Clinton. Fuel the burn, I think, is his current advertising slogan. Now, Bernie is socialist and is generating some excitement amongst particularly the young people in America, almost Ron Paul-esque, although from an opposite end of the political spectrum, as he campaigns for the White House. And this is Garry Kasparov, and a very pointed and extremely accurate assessment of what's going on here. I'll read it out if I may. It's quite short. He says, I'm enjoying the irony of American Sanders supporters lecturing me, a former Soviet citizen, on the glories of socialism and what it really means. Socialism sounds great in speech soundbites and on Facebook, but please keep it there. In practice, it corrodes not only the economy, but the human spirit itself, and the ambition and achievement that made modern capitalism possible and brought millions of people out of poverty. Talking about socialism is a huge luxury, a luxury that was paid for by the successes of capitalism. Income inequality is a huge problem, absolutely, but the idea that the solution is more government, more regulation, more debt and less risk is dangerously absurd. I think that's wonderful, and I would point out specifically the point he talks about it corrodes not only the economy but the human spirit itself. We'll come back to that.
Okay, so how do we move from that to the famous Mr. Trump?
Well, Mr. Trump here, this is the other half of the American anti-establishment. And here you see Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. Now, they're both running on, we are not the establishment, we are outsiders, we are going to shake things up. And this paper here, published in FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education, by Jeffrey Tucker, long time and very prominent critic of Donald Trump, looks at this issue, and he's pointing out that simply being opposed to the establishment is not the same as being for liberty, because what they're looking to do is to take over the establishment, and then you simply got someone else running the same anti-liberal, anti-liberty machine that will enslave us in large and small ways, and that there's no guarantee that the person running the machine will be any better than the previous one. In fact, very often it seems to be that they're worse.
Okay, and apparently Mr. Trump lives in the same little village as Boris Johnson.
Yes, I like this. I had to explain it to my son, who is too young to have watched Trumpton. But for people of a certain age, and I think, Brian, you and I are both of a certain age.
Well, steady.
They will love this. As a small boy, I liked Trumpton enormously. And this skew, spew, barmy hairdo, cutthroat, bigot and smug is describing Donald Trump, and I think that's really very good.
Well, I'm sure this can't be true, because apparently he's going to bring lots of benefits to Scotland.
I loved this. This was great. I read many years ago a series of articles published in a Paris newspaper when Napoleon escaped from Elba. And the first one was "The Scoundrel Escapes from Elba." The second report was "Napoleon lands in France." And the third report was "The Emperor arrives in Paris." So you see the newspapers totally doing an about-face. Now, the National and the Scottish National Party, when they thought Trump was a joke candidate, were wanting to ban him from the country. Remember that, Brian?
Yes.
Well, here we have the National, which is the organ of the Scottish National Party, pretty much, the most national supporting newspaper in Scotland. And all of a sudden, oh, no, Donald, he's Scottish, you know, his mother was Scottish, and he really likes us. And if he's president when we need some help, we're sure he'll really remember his Scottish roots then, and we'll not talk about the whole banning him thing. That's really in the past, but we're all friends again now that he looks like he's got a chance of taking over the most powerful political seat on the planet.
With dangerous stuff happening in America, increasingly brutal and militarized police force at work, probably brings us to Mrs. Clinton.
Yeah, Mrs. Clinton. Yes, this is a somewhat controversial one. There is a bit of doubt as to whether these quotes are entirely accurate. I think the one from Clinton is depending on something that she said in an informal situation, and it's been reported secondhand to the author. So with that proviso, we do see a similarity between the collectivist views of National Socialism and the collectivist views of, let's face it, all of our government choices here. So the difference between one form of oppression and a slightly lighter form is not what it's necessarily cranked up to be. The other thing we should keep an eye on in terms of Mrs. Clinton is, of course, the ongoing email investigation. Now, very significantly, her email technician, her IT technician, who organised the server in her private residence, which was taking government traffic, has been given immunity to appear before a grand jury. Now, that means that the prosecutor in America is going after someone further up the tree. Now, there are several stages between Mrs. Clinton and this particular IT expert. So they might be going for one of her underlings, or they might be going for her. But either way, the fact that they've granted this technician immunity is very significant, and Mrs. Clinton should be very, very worried.
Well, we watched that one with interest, but on the subject of the rise of the dictatorship, that brings us nicely into the named person scheme. And this first image here is highlighting, of course, the fact that taxi drivers have been told in Scotland that they would have to report anything they heard in their taxis, which concerned children. And I'll just follow that up before I hand back to you. This is an advert for the Aberdeen Roadshow. So
yes, the Aberdeen Roadshow was on Monday. We went up there. In fact, we had meteors exploding over Aberdeenshire as we headed north. It was very spectacular. And then we got up to Aberdeen, and the gentleman you're about to see is, in fact, a professor at Aberdeen University. He's Canadian in origin, and he had a long run-in with the Scottish authorities, and it seemed to be the reason was he was a single father, and that was viewed as somehow odd, suspicious, questionable. You must need help. Anyway, they were insistent that they were going to help him, and the help involved interference in his family life, which he didn't want and couldn't stop, despite being, obviously, as a professor, extremely well educated, extremely eloquent, quite well connected. He had all of these services descend on him for years, and it took a long, long time for him to extricate his family from the unwanted attention. The piece of paper he was holding up, which you saw was heavily redacted, in fact, was all black, was in fact a piece of information held on his family by the Scottish authorities, and he obtained under one of a great series of subject access requests. But he still wasn't allowed to know what the council and the authorities were saying about his family. He described the pages and pages of information he did get exploding his 1-year-old's problem with thumb sucking, and other detailed examination of the issue of nappy rash. So we're not talking about child protection concerns. We're talking about the minutiae of family life. We're talking about complete state surveillance, essentially, of everything.
Okay, so David, we've got this picture showing a well-attended meeting, and we've got this one here, which looks like a mass of documents. Is those the documents you're referring to?
No, that is, as you remember, they can't define well-being, but they've got 8 indicators under the acronym SHINARI. But they've also got 300-400 outcome signifiers, which define what good parenting and good childhood is meant to be in Scotland. That is it. That is what you're meant to do. That's how you will be judged as a parent.
Right. And the roadshow continues apace. So this is our Broth, Monday the 14th of March, 7:30 to 9 p.m. Those who can get there, we encourage to go, of course. And
there's other roadshows coming up in Airdriecote Bridge area, in Castle Douglas, down in the border, somewhere around about Kelso or Melrose, and perhaps also in Dundee as well, all before we go to the polls on May the 5th. So the campaign will be moving along apace.
And to show why people need to attend these sorts of roadshows, we've got this headline here, which you've pulled out from the Mail. Orwellian psychological test for school children, which sees them interrogated over whether their parents nurtured them enough. This is exactly what you're saying, that the state is saying we know best for your children. That really means, of course, that David Cameron and Nippy, yeah, I just couldn't grasp the Nippy bit. That was what I was looking for. Nippy and these other politicians, we don't know how to look after our children. They do. We've got some comment here on the...
At least David Cameron's got children. Nicola Sturgeon actually doesn't, but her government will tell us how to raise ours, of course.
Well, I mean, David Cameron's lucky he's got his children because he keeps losing them, doesn't he? But there we go. So the comment on the Daily Mail site here is the SNP creepy party getting worse. People are picking up on this, aren't they?
Yes. On that first page you showed, the article had been shared 5,200 times, and the comment about the SNP creepy party had 525 likes. So you're seeing a great deal of attention to this. Also, they took the article, the questionnaire that was given to the school children, and ran it past our friend Maggie Mellon of the No to Name Person campaign, and author of the article we've already discussed. to say what she, in her expert opinion, because she really is extremely well qualified in this area, she thought of the questionnaire. Her comments: the wellbeing indicators in this tool are clearly being used as a test of parents. They are not really about the child's view, as there is no attempt to measure the child's happiness or creativity. She goes on, but that's it. It's not about the child. It's about state surveillance of family life.
Of the parents. Now, I'm not sure whether this particular information has been taken from the Daily Mail online again, but I assume the one you're going for is the James McNee one. He said, here's a link to the news coverage this morning in the Daily Telegraph. You could be forgiven for thinking you'd woken up in East Germany or North Korea rather than Scotland under the SNP's obsession with controlling every aspect of our lives. Was that the one you were going for?
Well, you can pick almost anything from this page, actually. The previous one you see talks about civil disobedience on a mass scale is the only way forward. This is from the No to Name Person Facebook page. They get hundreds of comments from concerned people, mostly in Scotland, mostly parents, about this on a daily basis. Every article goes up tends to have a lot of comments around about it.
Right.
And the view from the public is they're livid. I mean, they can't believe our government's trying to do this to us. They want the government to leave us alone. And the anger's only building.
Okay, and this one looks very interesting. We've got 2 children here. The dad forgot to make a costume, so he was going to send them to school as pages 89 and 165 of the Argos catalogue.
It's always good to have a little bit of humour in there. When you're fighting the government, they don't use humour. They never use humour. It's very good when you're resisting all of this state power to keep a smile on your face while you're doing it. It keeps your spirits up, and by here, they don't like it.
They don't like it at all. I noticed that you've done this particular sequence this way round. We've had the humour, now we're going to knock it out of people, because this little form really spells out what the government north of the border, well, in fact, it's got NHS on it, so is this just north of the border or is this south of the border as well?
This has come from Argyll and Bute Council. So this is what all of those Syrian refugees that are going to be housed in Bute are going to be subject to. I wonder how they'll view this. One of the comments here: our work puts your child at the centre of what needs to be done. I don't know how you feel about that. I'm not thrilled. And then they go on: when we make decisions about your child, we will always find out what they think and record it in a way best suited to their age and needs. So where's the parent in that?
Nowhere to be seen, and I will say that shortly before we came on live today, I took a telephone call from a lady who was deeply upset because social services were making diagnoses on her child which she'd never been informed about. This is where the real danger of the state comes in. People giving themselves more and more power and totally unaccountable to the public, unaccountable to their own elected councillors in most cases. Well, child abuse, we say, is about the government controlling the country, police involved with it, but we've got here the police are finally investigating themselves or not.
This is a link to the No to Name Person campaign, actually. This gentleman here was the head of the police complaints body that, amongst other things, looked at the Holly Gregg case. He is also now the Scottish Public Ombudsman and has come out this week against the Name Person campaign. Against the Name Person scheme on the grounds that it is the complaints procedure is not workable and not flexible. The complaints procedure is in fact a choice between going off into the distance never to be seen again or going in a giant loop and coming back to where you started. The complaints procedure is awful, and he is recognising this and has stated so publicly. So that's good. It's only a small public criticism, but the fact that he's made it, I think, is quite significant.
Right, okay.
His name is Jim Martin, incidentally.
All right, thank you for that. We've got Holyrood here, MSPs and their queasy feelings.
Yes, this is Jim Martin again. Right now, Jim Martin here had a whole series of petitions raised about his role and the ombudsman's role, and all those petitions were discharged and not looked at by the Holyrood Parliament in several minutes. So they went through that quite quickly. So he has been a matter of some controversy, but at least he's in a small way on the right side of this argument.
Okay. Well, David, I've jumped through to the section on children, and you've picked up on the BBC here. Detective who wanted to speak to minister was taken off the case. We know firsthand, UK column knows firsthand that police detectives were regularly taken off the case if their investigations got too close to child abuse by politicians and establishment figures. This is another case.
Yes, interesting to see the BBC put this on Newsnight, and interesting to see that they did name the minister concerned, Paul Boateng. They weren't alleging he'd done anything inappropriate, but simply that his role, he was critic of the Met, he was in a position of authority over them, and as soon as he became a matter of legitimate interest to an investigation into child sexual abuse, that investigation was shut down, and the policeman was threatened with dire consequences and disciplinary action, which then didn't happen. So it seemed to be, it has all the colour of a cover-up.
All the colour of a cover-up, and we've also got this sort of thing going on. The council employed an abuser to look after children. I'll say recently I had a communication from a lady more or less talking about this, people who'd got convictions for abuse offences simply being allowed around children without any form of, I knew it as the CRB check, it's changed now, but any form of background checks.
Yes, and this was, of course, at Lambeth, who have a whole series of scandals surrounding the care homes that they ran in the area.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned this film to me before, Spotlight. Just remind us why you're so enthusiastic about this one.
I was recommending it, and it is a first-rate film. It really is excellent. And it won the Oscar for Best Film. I would have to say the press reports on it winning the Oscar for Best Film were somewhat subdued. It didn't seem to get quite the headlines I would have expected. I suspect because of the area that it was looking at so well, which was the cover-up of child sexual abuse by the highest-ranking people within the Roman Catholic clergy in the Boston area. Right,
and this brings this man on screen. I was going to say nicely, but brings this man on screen.
Yes. Yes, I think this is that the chap from.
This is Cardinal Sean O'Malley.
Yes, I think he was. Yes, he would be on the Boston area, wouldn't he?
Archbishop of Boston.
Yes. Yes, O'Malley is looking to get some sort of forgiveness, but of course the people that are abused and the people who were victims really have to have justice and have to have some sort of closure here, because the situation was that the abusers were just being moved every year or two as more abuse happened. They were moved to the next parish. The parish wasn't warned, and they would simply carry on with the abuse. And it was really serial enabling by the highest ranking people within the Roman Catholic Church in that area.
Right, and we've got another case of abuse through the church. St. Louis Archbishop Robert Carrison here.
This one is certainly in the sort of bizarre area. If anyone can look at the video that goes with this, you'll see him being interviewed, and interviewed as to whether he knew having sex with children was wrong, and his answer was, "Well, I don't know about whether I knew that at the time. I know it now."
Yeah. Well, maybe he spent a lot of time in the Vatican, and it was sort of quite normal to him. He didn't realise it was a problem.
Yes, but I mean, utterly ridiculous. And to say it publicly, to say it on the stand, they just look. They look not only fools, but they look evil, and that's the public face of some of the most high-ranking people within the Roman Catholic and indeed other church organisations concerning this.
Well, you've mentioned the word, so we'll put it on screen. Here it is: see no evil, hear no evil, stop no evil.
Yeah, so here we get to dear George Pell, Cardinal Pell, who was in charge of the Roman Catholic Church in Australia when much of the abuse was happening, or was in it, and then latterly running it. And when the Royal Commission, there's a Royal Commission called in Australia, and unlike our non-investigations in Great Britain, the Royal Commission in Australia seems to have been doing some excellent work in actually bringing out a great deal of truth and information. I saw some comments when it was set up saying it was a piece of nonsense. It was simply responding to knee-jerk pressure from various political groups. It was politically motivated. There's really nothing to see here. There's not a child sexual abuse. This is complete nonsense. Well, no one's saying that now, because the Royal Commission in Australia has actually done excellent work to reveal a great deal of what was going on in Australia.
Right.
They wanted to speak to the man in charge, Cardinal Pell, who would obviously have valuable information. Cardinal Pell said, well, under doctor's orders, he was told not to take any long-haul flights, and therefore he would stay in the Vatican and he wouldn't go back to Australia. The object of taking several short-haul flights in maybe a week to make the move, or a boat, or any other form of transport, clearly didn't occur to him. And this went down very badly in Australia, as a lot of people felt that he had betrayed them once again. Social media has been all over this, and my favourite one here, this is Cardinal George Pell's Twitter account, and the comment says, how many Twitter followers does he have? The devil is in the details, and indeed he has 666 followers. An interesting number.
Well, the black humour's coming in there, but obviously an extremely serious subject. And as we've seen with Teresa Cooper, and read her book if you haven't read it, Pinned Down, she is talking about the abuse within a Church of England children's home. Horrific abuse. What did the church do? Try and deny everything despite the evidence. Well, we've got a gentleman who's decided to take some action from himself, Tim Minchin, and he's produced a video clip, which I think we're going to be able to show.
Yes, Tim Minchin's made a song about this. It's excellent. It's actually very catchy. I warn you, you will find yourself singing this at odd moments in the day. It's available on iTunes, and all the proceeds from this go to the survivors in Australia. So I would encourage people who hear this and like it to get onto iTunes or one of the other purchasing sites and get a copy of this for yourself. It's excellent. It brings humour, it brings anger, appropriate and righteous anger, and it brings a spotlight on what needs exposed in Australia. And clearly it's the sort of thing we need to be seeing here as well.
Okay. I think that should come on screen shortly.
It's a lovely day in Ballarat. I'm kicking back, thinking of you. I hear that you've been poorly. I am sorry that you're feeling blue. I know what it's like when you feel a little shitty. You just want to curl up and have an itty bitty do-not day. But a lot of people here really miss you, Georgie. They really think you ought to just get on a plane. Just get on a plane. We all just want you to come home, Cardinal Pell. I know you're not feeling well, and being crook ain't much fun. Even so, we think you should come home, Cardinal Pell. Come down from your citadel. It's just the right thing to do. They have a right to know what you knew. Couldn't you see what what was under your nose, Georgie, back in 73 when you were living with Jerry? Is it true that you knew but you chose to ignore, or did you actively try to keep it buried? And years later, when survivors, despite the shame and their fear, stood up to tell their stories, you spent year after year working hard to protect the church's assets. I mean, with all due respect, dude, I think you're scum, and I reckon you should come home, Cardinal Pell. We know you're not feeling well, perhaps you just need some sun. It's lovely here, you should come home, you pompous buffoon, and I suggest do it soon. I hear the tolling of a bell, and it has a Pellian knell. I wanna be transparent here, George, I'm not the greatest fan of your religion, and I personally believe that those who cover up abuse should go to prison. But your ethical hypocrisy, your intellectual vacuity, and your arrogance don't bother me as much as the fact that you have turned out to be such a goddamn coward. You're a coward, Georgie. Come and face the music, Georgie. You owe it to the victims, Georgie. Come and face the music, the music. Hallelujah, hallelujah. If the Lord God omnipotent reigneth, he would take one look at you and say, go home, Cardinal Pell. I've got a nice spot in hell with your name on it, and so I suggest you toughen up and go home, Cardinal Pell. I'm sure they'll make you feel welcome at the pub in Ballarat. They just want a beer and a chat. I know you're scared, Georgie Poo. They have a right to know what you do. Your time is running out to atone, Georgie. I think the Lord is calling you home, Georgie. Perhaps he could forgive even you. He may forgive even you if you just let them know what you knew. Oh, Cardinal Pell, my lawyer just rang me to tell me this song could get me in legal trouble. Oh, well, Cardinal Pell, if you don't feel compelled to come home by a sense of moral duty, perhaps you will come home and frickin' sue me.
Well, there we are. Very serious subject put into music and words for a really good cause. Isn't it wonderful to see people speaking out? David, thank you very much for joining us. We'll end on that poignant note. We'll be back Monday, 1 o'clock. Bye-bye.